of unidentified flying objects have been definitely attributed to natural phenomena that are neither mysterious nor dire, end quote. What about that?
I'll answer that, but I'd like to make several points doing it. In 1947, the Air Technical Intelligence Center at Dayton, the top Air Force intelligence men.
Paul Bennewitz lived next to one of the largest Air Force bases in the country. When he noticed colored lights darting across the sky, he figured they were experimental aircraft. But then he started picking up bizarre radio signals, ones that sounded like an alien language. When he shared his findings with the Air Force, they publicly dismissed the idea of UFOs. Privately, however, they encouraged Paul, even funding his research.
And signed us under contract. Sent a secret document to the commanding general of the Air Force saying that whatever these things were, they were real. In 1948, ATIC, the same group, sent a top secret estimate to the commanding general, Hoyt Vandenberg, said these were interplanetary spaceships. In 1952, there was an intelligence analysis of the maneuvers of these things, as seen by radar, triangulation, radar photographs, and in 1953, the Central Intelligence Agency and the Air Force had a special panel of scientists meet at the Pentagon.
For years, he gathered evidence and passed it along to authorities. Then, inexplicably, he found himself in a mental institution. What happened? In 1969, while pursuing a PhD in physics, Paul founded Thunder Scientific, a successful electronics company in New Mexico. His main clients were the Air Force and NASA, and he worked so closely with the military that he bought a house and set up a lab next to Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque. Kirtland was massive, with science labs, weapons testing facilities, and even nuclear storage areas. From the second-floor deck of his house, Paul often observed strange, colorful lights zipping around the base, too fast to be conventional aircraft. He started documenting everything. As an engineer and physicist, Paul set up radio equipment and intercepted transmissions in the gigahertz range, frequencies far beyond what the military used at the time. The signals were bursts of data, and within them, Paul believed he found messages. This seemed to contradict the Air Force's official stance. As Richard Horner, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Research and Development, once said, all but a small percentage of these reports of unidentified flying objects have been definitely attributed to natural phenomena that are neither mysterious nor dire. But history suggests otherwise. In 1947, Air Force intelligence issued a secret document confirming the existence of unexplained phenomena. By 1948, top secret estimates labeled them interplanetary spaceships. In 1952, intelligence analyses documented their maneuvers using radar and photo triangulation. And in 1953, a CIA panel even recommended quadrupling investigations into these sightings.
To tell him what to do. And after they got through, this group said, you don't have proof that these things exist, not scientific proof, but you have a very strong circumstantial case. We suggest you quadruple the investigation, set up special observation posts, in the meantime, release everything you've got to the American people. And they have been spending a lot of money investigating flying saucers. If they don't exist, why the money? Why did the intelligence teams rush out every time there's a sighting?
Paul's intercepted signals seemed to fit into this puzzle. He used an early home computer, writing software to analyze the data bursts. Initially, the messages were indecipherable, so Paul used a cryptographic technique based on context. He assumed the signals would include words like ship, base, and water. This approach eventually worked, revealing patterns that gave him a rough idea of the message's meanings. Here's where things took a risky turn. Using the decoded language, Paul sent a message back on the same frequency. To his astonishment, he received a response. One of the first messages he decoded read, "Ground. Women of Earth are needed. Flexible. The next discharges. Our ship. Our women do not command the North among us. You have many friends. Water. Very short. Resist all attempts of adoration. Listen. Orange. Make peace." While cryptic, it seemed peaceful enough, until you consider the women of Earth are needed. Another message followed. Victory. Our bases obtain supplies from the starship metal. Time is yanked. Time is yet. Message hit star. Using rejuvenation methods got us in trouble. 6 sky, we realized. Tell you all might help you. Paul Bennewitz had established what he believed to be the first two-way communication with an alien civilization. Convinced they were not here with good intentions, he used this connection to uncover their plans and, if possible, identify their weaknesses. After countless exchanges, Paul eventually learned the aliens' motives. They weren't good. Paul discovered that the aliens' homeworld was dying and that multiple alien species were already present on Earth. Many resembled the classic gray aliens with large eyes, but there was also a human-like race that looked just like us, only more attractive. At this point, Paul was certain an invasion was imminent and felt compelled to warn the public. He compiled a detailed dossier of his findings and theories and approached the Air Force. As a veteran and a trusted military contractor, Paul was granted an audience. He insisted that Americans needed to be warned immediately so they could prepare for defense. You'd think they dismissed him as a lunatic, right? Wrong. The government took his claims seriously. The base commander brought in the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, OSI, to evaluate Paul's work, and they were intrigued. Agent Richard Doty was assigned to investigate his findings. Doty visited Paul's home to examine his films, radio equipment, and the tools he used to document and communicate with the aliens. The Air Force even agreed to fund Paul's research on the condition that he share all his findings with them, and Paul accepted. With the Air Force's backing and Agent Doty's involvement, Paul set out to gather enough intelligence to expose the aliens and protect humanity. Think the movies E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind were just Hollywood fantasy? What if there's more to it than that? These films were reportedly influenced by MJ-12, the organization managing the UFO cover-up, to subtly prepare the public for the revelation that aliens exist. Both movies featured small, gentle extraterrestrials designed to ease us into the idea of benevolent alien visitors. But, according to Paul's findings, this portrayal couldn't be further from the truth. The release of E.T. came before the discovery of what Paul called the double cross, or the grand deception. At the time, they aimed to condition us into accepting friendly aliens, but the reality is far darker. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, Bill Moore became a prominent figure in the UFO community. In 1980, he published The Roswell Incident, a groundbreaking book that reintroduced Roswell to public consciousness. Before Moore, few knew or cared about the event, but his book provided the foundation for much of what we now know about the Roswell UFO crash. When Bill Moore asked Paul Bennewitz if they could meet, Paul agreed. The two men became friends and met every few months over the next year. During that time, Paul expressed frustration, saying he sent a massive amount of data to the Air Force each week, but nothing ever came of it. Then, in 1981, Bill Moore handed Paul a secret government file called Project Aquarius, which had been dated a year earlier. Upon reading it, Paul was shocked. The 7602 Air Force Intelligence Group had been analyzing all his data without informing him. This was undeniable proof that the Air Force was taking him seriously, but why had they lied to him about it? Bill Moore then spoke carefully and quietly. Paul, you'd better be very cautious with what you do with this. Use it for your research, but beyond that, just sit on it. The last paragraph of the Aquarius document read, "The official U.S. government policy and results of Project Aquarius are still classified top secret, with no dissemination outside official intelligence channels and with restricted access to MJ-12. The case on Benowitz is being monitored by NASA ENINs, who request all future evidence be forwarded to them through AFOSI EVOD due to the possibility of public exposure." Did that just mention MJ-12? It did. At the time, neither Bill Moore nor Paul Bennewitz knew what it was. This was the first appearance of Majestic 12 in any document. In brief, Majestic 12 is a group of 12 people who control all information related to UFOs. Every sighting, investigation, or mention of a UFO is reported to them, and only they can decide how to handle it. As a pilot, Paul began conducting flyovers of what he suspected was an underground base, Arculeta Mesa near Dulce, New Mexico. He took pictures of domes, vents leading underground, and towering structures, all of which he included in his reports. This continued for several years. However, things took a disturbing turn. While monitoring alien transmissions, it appeared that there had been a relationship or agreement between the aliens and the U.S. government, but it seemed to have broken down. On his next flight, Paul witnessed scorched earth, flattened trees, and even downed aircraft, as if a battle had occurred over Dulce. If the U.S. was to win a war against the aliens, it would need new weapons and a strategy. Luckily, Paul Bennewitz had both. Using the vast amounts of information he intercepted from alien transmissions, Paul created a document called Project Beta. It contained the alien takeover plan, a strategy for defeating them, and a weapon that could be used against them. He even managed to build a working prototype of this energy weapon. Project Beta claimed that aliens had abducted, conservatively, around 300,000 Americans, implanting them with devices before returning them to the general population. These implants turned every individual into a walking camera and microphone. The devices could be used to implant false memories, control minds, or even shut down the brain entirely. At the base under Dulce, horrific experiments were allegedly taking place. Genetic modifications, such as splicing alien DNA with humans. Paul Bennewitz sent Project Beta to senators, elected officials, and even the President of the United States. The only response he received was a standard form letter stating that Project Blue Book had been closed and that the Air Force no longer investigated UFOs. Paul knew this was a lie. He had the Project Aquarius document to prove it. The only logical explanation was that the government was compromised. It seemed that high-ranking military officials, politicians, and even the president might have been implanted. As the years went on, Paul Bennewitz became increasingly frustrated and paranoid. When Bill Moore and Richard Doty visited to check on his well-being, things were not good. Paul had knives and guns scattered throughout his house. He insisted that he was constantly being watched and followed. He had lost so much weight he appeared ill, and he was chain-smoking, consuming a full pack of cigarettes every hour. Paul claimed that aliens were entering his house at night, injecting him with something that forced him to drive into the desert, only to return home with no memory of what had happened. His research was too important to him. As his mental health continued to decline, Paul became distrustful of everyone. He believed his wife had been implanted with an alien device. His children had to take over his business. Conspiracy to take over the world was all fabricated. It was a lie created for him by Richard Doty and the United States government. The Air Force Office of Special Investigation, OSI, has several responsibilities, one of which is counterintelligence. A common technique in counterintelligence is disinformation. When Paul Bennewitz intercepted transmissions from Kirtland Air Base, he didn't initially think they were from aliens. His concern was that if he could detect these transmissions, so could Soviet spies. After thoroughly reviewing Paul's equipment and research, the Air Force realized Paul was correct. The signals were indeed coming from the base and were vulnerable, which was a significant issue. They also discovered that the objects Paul had captured on film, which appeared to be UFOs, were actually secret experimental aircraft. Another problem. But rather than tell Paul the truth, which, according to the Air Force, could jeopardize security, Special Agent Richard Doty was tasked with a different mission: to feed Paul disinformation, convincing him that he had uncovered a hostile alien presence. Why not just tell him to stop? The Air Force couldn't risk revealing who Paul's contacts were. If Paul had been compromised by a Soviet agent, they would learn about the secret projects taking place at the base. So the Air Force chose a different route. At first, it was just a simple suggestion from Doty. He'd say, "Well, Paul, maybe what you saw were UFOs." Nothing too specific. But over time, The lies Doty told Paul grew more detailed, and other government agencies became involved. Eventually, Paul became convinced that he was being monitored from a vacant house across the street. It was easy to dismiss this as paranoia, but Paul was right. The National Security Agency was indeed watching him from that house. To make matters worse, the alien transmissions Paul decoded were actually coming from the NSA. They even replaced Paul's computer to ensure that he decoded the messages in the way they wanted him to. It was all a fabrication, and Paul fell for it, suffering as a result. Paul was a victim of the government's counterintelligence operation. As documented through the Freedom of Information Act, we know that the CIA and military have consistently worked to mislead the public on the subject of UFOs, providing them with distorted truths. This pattern has repeated itself over the decades. When author Bill Moore was at the height of his prominence in the UFO community, he was contacted by someone from government intelligence. We now know that individual was Richard Doty. Doty offered Moore a deal. He would receive government documents about UFOs and learn what the government was hiding. But in exchange, Moore would spread Doty's fabricated UFO stories and inform on other members of the UFO community. Doty's goal was to uncover the identities and knowledge of UFO enthusiasts. The concern was that if Paul Bennewitz could intercept secret military data, others might be able to do the same. The U.S. was building and testing stealth or drone technology at Kirtland Air Base, information that could not afford to fall into enemy hands. If you follow Richard Doty's interviews over the years, you'll notice the details don't always line up. Maybe that's just a product of aging. But what about his job history? He worked for the Air Force, specifically spreading false information about UFOs. Then he became a policeman. He talks about these things casually, but I've never heard him mention that he spent a decade working as a contractor for Hal Puthoff. I won't go into detail about Puthoff here, but for those unfamiliar, he's the founder of To the Stars, a private company investigating UFOs. So who else is on the board of To the Stars? Well, there's Christopher Mellon from the Mellon family, who, when he's not enjoying his billionaire lifestyle, has worked for both the CIA and the Department of Defense. Then there's Steve Justice, the former director of Advanced Systems Development at Lockheed Martin's notorious Skunk Works division, who has led many classified military projects. Good luck finding any information about him. And Luis Elizondo, a former intelligence officer who ran the secret government program AATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. AATIP was essentially a continuation of Project Blue Book, a military initiative to investigate UFOs. The government denied AATIP's existence until the New York Times uncovered it. This private company, claiming to bring UFOs into the mainstream, is full of senior figures from the U.S. intelligence community. And they hire people like Richard Doty, foot soldiers of that apparatus. Have these individuals really had a change of heart? They spent their careers executing covert operations against American citizens and spreading lies to people searching for the truth. The New York Times revealed secret government UFO programs, and the Navy has released footage of pilots tracking UFOs. But how much more do we really know? The government has recently released a massive amount of UFO-related documents, and Congress even held a public hearing on the subject. But do we know much more? Not really. Was Richard Doty lying back then? Is he lying now? Who knows? In August and September of 1980, an unsettling series of UFO sightings occurred near Kirtland Air Force Base, AFB, in New Mexico, specifically over the restricted Coyote Canyon area. The incidents began when 3 security policemen, assigned to the Manzano weapons storage area, spotted an unusual light moving rapidly across the sky. Initially thinking it was a helicopter, they were stunned when the object stopped abruptly, then hovered before descending into the canyon. As they continued watching, they realized this was no ordinary helicopter. Its movements defied the capabilities of conventional aircraft. Later, they watched as the light ascended straight up at an incredible speed and vanished. This was just the beginning. On August 9th, a Sandia security guard reported seeing a similar object, a round disc, near a building in the same area. Despite his initial assumption that it was a helicopter, his proximity revealed it was something else entirely. As he approached, the object shot up vertically at an extraordinary speed. Other reports followed, including one from a New Mexico state patrolman who saw an object land in the area. These sightings raised questions, as the military confirmed that no aerial tests were conducted in the region at that time. Even stranger, radar systems went offline on August 13th, possibly due to high-frequency jamming, which was traced back to the same general area. So what are your thoughts on these mysteries? Let us know in the comments below and subscribe for more.